President Xi Jinping has been re-elected unanimously to serve a third term. Former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying is re-elected as Vice Chairman of CPPCC. And Financial Secretary announces details of the new batch of consumption vouchers. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. President Xi Jinping was unanimously re-elected as China's president and chairman of the Central Military Commission during a 14th National People's Congress meeting today. The National Legislature also elected Zhao Leji as the new chairman of the NPC Standing Committee and Han Zheng the new vice president. The third meeting of the 14th National People's Congress session was held at the Great Hall of the People this morning. That's where some 2,950 delegates voted to elect the Chinese president and other leaders for a new term. Xi Jinping placed 4 ballot papers into the box at the podium. Politburo Standing Committee members, including Li Qiang and Zhao Leji, then casted their votes. During the vote, Xi Jinping was holding discussions with Li Qiang, Wang Huning, and Zhao Leji.
Now I declare that Comrade Xi Jinping is elected President of the People's Republic of China.
Elected unanimously, Xi immediately begins his third 5-year term as the country's leader. He was also unanimously elected to serve as chairman of the Central Military Commission for another term. Other state leaders were also elected during today's meeting. Politburo Standing Committee member Zhao Leji was elected chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress unanimously. He then shook hands with Xi Jinping and predecessor Li Jianshu. Han Zheng was also elected vice president unanimously. He was greeted by Xi Jinping and predecessor Wang Qishan. The newly elected state leaders then pledged their allegiance to the Constitution.
I pledge my allegiance to the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, to safeguard the Constitution authority, fulfill my legal obligations, be loyal to the country and the people, be committed and honest in my duty, accept the people's supervision, and work for a great modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. Xi Jinping.
Then it was Zhao Leji and Han Zheng's turn to take their oath of office.
我宣誓
Led by Li Hongzhong, the vice chairpersons of the NPC Standing Committee were then sworn into office. Earlier in the day, NPC members passed a draft resolution on the reform of China's state council institutions. And during a meeting of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference this afternoon, Wang Huning was elected the new chairman. Former Hong Kong Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying was re-elected as vice chairman. The Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference held its third plenary meeting this afternoon to elect its new leadership. Politburo Standing Committee member Wang Huning was elected as the new chairman of the nation's top advisory body. Vice chairman of the CPPCC, Hong Kong former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying was re-elected, making him the sole representative from the SAR. This as Tung Chee-hwa, who was vice chairman of the CPPCC, retired. Former Macau CE Edmund Ho was re-elected as vice chairman. There were 18 Hong Kong Standing Committee members of the CPPCC in the previous term. That's down to 16 this year. 7 Standing Committee members were re-elected this year. They include former Chief Secretary Henry Tang, former World Health Organization Director General Margaret Chan, Chairman of Henderson Land Peter Lee, Trade Development Council Chairman Peter Lam, and Chinese General Chamber of Commerce Chairman Jonathan Choi. There are 6 new Hong Kong Standing Committee members. They include former Food and Health Secretary Ko Wing-man and veteran politician Martin Liao, who was previously a deputy to the National People's Congress. Also, Shintech Holdings Pansy Ho and Deputy Chief of Beijing's Liaison Office in Hong Kong, Chen Dong. Meanwhile, C.K. Hutchinson Chairman Victor Lee will no longer be a standing committee member of the CPPCC.
Russian President Vladimir Putin was among the first foreign leaders to congratulate Xi Jinping on his third term. The chief executives of Hong Kong and Macau also offered their congratulations. Chief Executive John Lee said he sent a message of congratulation to Xi on behalf of the Hong Kong government and people. Lee will travel to Beijing on Sunday to attend the closing ceremony of the NPC session. Starry Lee, chairperson of the DAB party, said Hong Kong people should learn from the wisdom and sense of responsibility of Xi Jinping and other state leaders. In other news now, Financial Secretary Paul Chan announced today that the first installment of the latest consumption voucher, $3,000, will be disbursed to eligible residents on April 16th. The remaining amount, which is $2,000, will be distributed in 3 months' time. Chan said the consumption voucher is intended to stimulate Hong Kong's economy and support the city's post-pandemic recovery. Mimo Sengai tells us more.
Earlier, Financial Secretary Paul Chan said in his budget speech that each eligible Hong Kong resident can collect a total of $5,000 consumption voucher. Non-permanent residents can also receive $2,500. Speaking at a press conference today, Paul Chan said the consumption voucher will be disbursed in 2 installments. People who had successfully registered last year for the consumption voucher will receive the first installment, $3,000, on April 16th, without the need to register afresh. The remaining $2,000 will be disbursed on July 16th to 5 electronic wallet platforms, including Alipay Hong Kong and WeChat Pay Hong Kong. Residents who use Octopus cards to collect the voucher will have to spend the $3,000 before end of June, or they will not be able to collect the remaining $2,000 in July. Chan also defended the effectiveness of the consumption voucher.
At the moment, we think the primary objective of the consumption voucher scheme is to stimulate domestic consumption. The current arrangement is already the best we can do.
The government said residents have to collect the first installment of the consumption vouchers using the same stored value facility accounts as last year. Otherwise, they will need to update their registration records on their accounts within this month. Mimo Senai, TVB News.
The Education Bureau announced students will no longer be required to do RATs or temperature checks before school starting next Thursday. Still, all teaching staff and visitors to schools must undergo temperature checks before entering the campus. The scrapping of the RAT mandate would mean anti-epidemic controls in schools are almost fully lifted. Authorities reminded schools to keep an eye on the overall health conditions of teachers and students. Schools should also report to health authorities about any suspected outbreaks of infectious diseases according to current mechanisms. Hong Kong United Dockyards, which is under C.K. Hutchinson Holdings, has proposed to convert a dockyard in Tsing Yi and government land north of the dockyard into a site to build homes and a yacht club. According to the application submitted by the Hong Kong United Dockyards Group, the land site has an area of almost 20 hectares. The initial idea is to have about 10,000 private housing units and 5,000 public housing units. The applicant says the location is about 5 kilometers away from the north of Kau Yi Chau artificial islands. Overseas, in Germany, at least 8 people have been killed after a shooting at a religious gathering in Hamburg. It happened on Thursday evening. The motive for the killings is still being investigated, but the gunman is one of the dead and appears to have killed himself after shooting others. David Garrett has more.
Emergency services rushed to the scene, medics and law enforcement. It is rare to see armed police on the streets of Germany. There have been reports of an armed assailant moving through a building and shooting at people in Hamburg. The hall is being used by Jehovah's Witnesses, and it is thought a Bible class was taking place. This footage shows armed police entering the building and moving cautiously into what is reported to be a Jehovah's Witness church. Then the police inch their way up the stairs on the lookout for a gunman. Authorities had to cordon off the area and moved members of the public away from the scene. A petrol station next door had to be evacuated. After reports of shots being fired, the German army and the bomb squad were called in. This young man, called Gregor, appears to still be in a state of shock. He lives across the road and witnessed the shots being fired from his apartment. At first, he said he could not believe what he was seeing. He says, "I was just about to call the police when hundreds of police cars came. There were also people being carried out, and there were probably 25 shots at least that I heard." Hamburg police announced several people had died, others were injured and taken to hospital. Officers heard shots from an upper part of the building and said there were no indications that perpetrators had fled. It appears the shooter may have turned the gun on himself. Police said they did not discharge their own weapons. They said the reason for the shooting is completely unclear. Forensic teams have been working through the night to identify victims and gather evidence. As dawn broke, Hamburg's mayor described the news as shocking, and police confirmed the attacker was among the dead. David Garrett, TVB News.
Another exchange between the Chinese and Philippine Coast Guards took place in the South China Sea on Thursday. A Chinese Coast Guard ship issued a radio warning to a Philippine Coast Guard aircraft as it flew over the disrupted Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, telling it to immediately leave Chinese territory. The Philippine pilot radioed back, stating the Chinese vessel was transiting inside Philippine territorial sea. The Philippine plane flew over another hotspot for China-Philippines tensions, the second Thomas Shoal. Manila has long maintained a small contingent of military personnel there to preserve its territorial claim. China's Coast Guard challenged the plane again as it flew over the shoal. Beijing's foreign ministry said on Friday that relevant Chinese activity in the South China Sea is justified and normal. Still ahead on tonight's news, return of cruise travel to Hong Kong. Mexican cartel apologized to the US for abducting the wrong people. More protests in France against the proposed pension reform. Welcome back to TVB News. Cruising is back in Hong Kong as the first international cruise ship set sail from the city today. Its first voyage has been fully booked 2 weeks ago. The Resorts World 1 began its regular cruises from Hong Kong today, offering 2- and 3-night high-sea voyages. The 13-story cruise ship is able to house over 1,800 guests. The operator said the cruising sector looks promising as it banks on Hong Kong's international flight connections and its proximity to the mainland.
We for sure very confident about actually the return into Hong Kong. If you're looking at Hong Kong, it's actually the strategic location that you actually cater. You have vast international flight network to bring in the freight cruise into Hong Kong.
Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mau admits there were mishandling over some of the cases involving ceiling collapse in public hospitals. The health minister says he will consider requesting an interim report first from the committee that's newly set up to look into the cases.
There were protracted delays, but you do understand that social media work very quickly. Sometimes the news could spread much faster than the media. Within a matter of hours, pictures of such incidents were already found on social media. But for the HA, before they make any public announcement, they must get hold of all the relevant data first.
This comes as another incident was reported today, this time involving an office in Tuen Mun Hospital. The hospital confirmed materials on the secondary ceiling has fallen off. A social media page also revealed that concrete objects fell from the ceiling on the corridor of the Queen Mary Hospital Nursing School in June last year. The hospital said no one was injured at the time. Overseas, a few days after 4 Americans were abducted in Mexico, with 2 of them killed, a letter claiming to be from a Mexican drug cartel has apologized. The cartel also turned over to authorities its own members who it said were responsible. This report from NBC News.
The stunning photos show 5 men laying on the pavement, each with hands tied and all but one shirtless, with a handwritten letter claiming to be from Mexico's Gulf Cartel stuck to the windshield. A bizarre scene that tonight a senior law enforcement official tells NBC News appears to be an apology from the cartel following the kidnapping that left 2 Americans dead. The shocking admission almost unprecedented.
Have you seen a PR situation like this?
No, I have not. They made a huge mistake. They killed 2 Americans. And they know that the Mexican government is going after them. They know that we're going to go after them as well.
The letter, obtained by the Associated Press from a Mexican official, includes apologies to the people of Matamoros, the Mexican woman who was killed, and the families of the Americans. It reads in part, the Gulf Cartel Scorpion Group strongly condemns the events of Friday, March 3rd. For this reason, we have decided to hand over those involved, adding the men acted under their own determination and undisciplined and against the rules in which the cartel has always operated. Mexican authorities have not confirmed if the men are in custody or if they're truly responsible. Meanwhile, in Texas, as officials work to get 2 slain Americans back home, survivor Eric James Williams is recovering. His wife sharing doctors placed metal rods in his leg, wounded in the hail of gunfire. Tonight, the cartel ending their letter, asking society to remain calm, closing with the guilty parties will pay, regardless of who they are.
Malaysia's former Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin has been charged with corruption and money laundering. The 75-year-old pleaded innocent to 4 charges of abusing his power to obtain over $50 million in bribes for his party and 2 charges of money laundering involving over $40 million. He has been released on bail. Muhyiddin was arrested yesterday by the country's anti-graft agency. It questioned him over government stimulus projects to ethnic Malay contractors during the COVID-19 pandemic. Muhyiddin was the second former leader to be charged after ex-Prime Minister Najib Razak. Najib began a 12-year jail term in August. He was convicted to the looting of the 1MDB State Development Fund. Russia has fired a huge wave of missiles into Ukraine, killing at least 9 civilians and knocking out power. It was the largest bombardment of missiles Russia has deployed in weeks and says it was retaliation for what it calls a terrorist attack on Bryansk last week. Moscow's defense ministry confirmed the attack in a briefing where they released footage. They described the strikes as high precision, using long-range air, sea and land-based weapons. The spokesman said key elements of Ukraine's military infrastructure were the targets, including energy facilities. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the attack was an attempt by a terrorist state to wage war against civilians. Young people continue to take to the streets of Paris to protest against the French government's push to raise the age eligible to receive a pension. This in the latest wave of nationwide protests against President Emmanuel Macron's controversial policy proposals. Daniel Rao tells us more.
Protests hit Paris on Thursday as hundreds of students led a march and others blocked access to some universities and high schools as part of nationwide strikes and demonstrations against the pension bill under debate in the French Parliament. The protests were mostly peaceful but briefly turned violent as some youths broke away, vandalized bus stops and set a car on fire. The young demonstrators include many supporters of the left-wing France Unbowed party. They see it as a fundamental right to be able to live on a state pension and perceive the bill as a rollback of hard-won social achievements. Also on Thursday, the energy branch of France's prominent union, CGT, cut power to the large sports complex in the northern suburbs of Paris, including the Stade de France and several construction sites of the infrastructure for the 2024 Paris Olympics. French President Emmanuel Macron wants to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 and require 43 years of work to earn a full pension. He claims the reforms are needed to keep the public pension system financially stable as the population ages. Opponents argue that wealthy taxpayers or companies should contribute more to finance the system instead. An economist shed further light on the aims of Macron's proposals.
The objective is not to go into a situation in a bad situation of public finances and to preserve the credibility of the French public debt. Today, France is considered by markets like a safety asset, more or less. We don't want to be in the situation that Italy or Spain were in during the Eurozone sovereign crisis.
Dan Orell, TVB News.
That's the news. Thanks for watching.